Building even one company takes a lot of effort. In this episode, we have Ivan, founder of Daytona, wherein he comes from Croatia, a small town in Croatia, wherein he has not only built multiple companies in past like Codeanywhere, Shift Conference, not only built from scratch, but also sold these companies and took a great exits as well. In this episode, I had the privilege of speaking to Ivan, founder of Daytona, wherein we've been talking about what Daytona is, how do you build a software company, how Daytona is helping in the world of developer productivity and bringing a lot of developer experiences in the world of software development lifecycle. We not only talk about what Daytona is, we'll also be diving into how to build a company, how to raise funds, what are the parameters, checklists you should have in mind while raising funds or talking to investors. We'll also be talking a lot about team building, how to hire great members to build your first set of core members. If you want to know answers of all of these questions, I would recommend you to watch till the end. I can't wait to get started. I'll see you in the podcast. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to a brand new one wherein we've got Ivan on the show today. Now it takes a lot of hard work to build one company. However, Ivan is a seasoned entrepreneur. He has built many in the past and right now is in the process of building Daytona. Today's podcast all going to be about understanding who is Ivan, what it takes to build a DevTool company, and what are the series of events which have led to Daytona. So without further ado, I'll get started and quickly gonna roll down to my first question. Ivan, who is Ivan, and could you walk us through the series of steps which has led to invention of Daytona, and who were you before founding Daytona?
Sure. I mean, I've been a lot of things and I've done a lot of different verticals throughout my life. Probably what's most interesting to Daytona is the last three companies. So Daytona, the one before that, and the one before that. The first one of those three was a company called Codeanywhere. So back in 2009, the founding team of Daytona also co-founded this company called Codeanywhere. It was the very first browser-based editor. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers are a lot younger, so they might have not been around or not like thinking about programming in that time, but it was like very cutting edge before Web 2.0. And so we started that way back when. We had a bit of success with Codeanywhere. There's like 2.5 million people on that platform, but it was never going to be some venture-backed business. So we ended up sort of leaving it there at some point. And starting to work on a new thing, which is a developer conference. So I went from software as a service for developers to a conference, which is a completely different industry, but again, for developers. And that conference ended up being acquired by this large company called Infobip. And I joined them to run their developer experience for a couple of years before founding Daytona. So developer experience, both in the software sense of DX, like what it looks like, the interfaces, the API, and developer experience in the sense of actually experiencing a physical event. So like show and light has been things that I've been obsessed with for the last decade and a half.
Amazing. So I'm sure you know a lot of hacks and tricks around how to do GTM, developer relations activity, because that's what you kind of sold your second one. Cool. Tell us a little more about Codeanywhere. How did you get? Was it acquired? What was the initial idea behind building Codeanywhere? Were you software engineer before? Were you a developer? So what led to building Codeanywhere? And is that
sure.
the first one?
Yeah. So I mean, I had companies before that. So I had a system integrator company before that. I had a search engine, a specific niche search engine before that. And sort of I did other things, like all random stuff as a kid, from anything from like delivering newspapers to working on construction to selling popcorn to doing like everything and anything. So did not come of means, and I had to like work my way up to getting where we are. But Codeanywhere was probably the most serious software product that we had created ever in our life. And both me and my co-founders were software developers. He more than I. I was more like just like web and stuff that I worked on as a freelancer. And the problem was that, everything at that time was going to the cloud. So Google Docs had just been announced. Gmail is a cool thing. Salesforce has been pushing that for a while in the sense of like everything should move to the cloud. But the IDE or the text editor never did. And we took it upon ourselves to go and build that. And so that was sort of the reason. It's like, no one's building this. Everything's moving to the cloud. Let's go and do this. Unfortunately for us, like coding hadn't moved to the cloud then. It's sort of now, 15 years later, but we were very, very early at that time. So they say with building companies, like timing is a very, very important factor, and we were a bit early on that one.
I think most of these, major cloud providers has some sort of flavor of these ID-based code editor, right? GCP has got their own, which lets you allow code on the browser. So, yeah.
Yeah, they do. And so they've all made some versions of it. But to be fair, the one at Google is not very good. Amazon had acquired a competitor to Codeanywhere called Cloud9, and they shut that down quite recently. The best one of them all is Microsoft's, or should I say GitHub's, which is Codespace's, but that has a bunch of limitations. But as far as like user experience or developer experience is, it's by far the best of any of these cloud vendors. And you would think that these cloud vendors are the best at everything. And especially when you're creating a company, you'll have investors ask you like, oh, can't these other companies kill you? Well, maybe yes, but more often than not, they're not actually specialized to do this thing that you're trying to do. And we've seen this numerous times throughout history. So the answer to your question is, yeah, kind of. But has anyone made it of quality that it can be used at large scale and big enterprises? Actually, really not. None of them have done that.
Would you be comfortable answering something like, are these all of these features which are built by these major cloud providers, a lot of these inspiration were taken from Codeanywhere, or?
I think so. Like I've talked to a lot of people throughout the years, and they said, "Oh, we looked at Codeanywhere when we were building this thing." So it's like it's great that you did. I'm super happy about that, and that's probably one of the reasons why we sort of came back with Daytona, which is a different product. It's an infrastructure product, not a browser-based type product. But it is still the soul or the spirit of the company is quite similar, because we've seen now that the market needs something like that, but no one has actually really solved the issue on that.
I definitely would love to get into what Daytona is, but before that, I have just a couple of more questions. Moving on to the next, if Ivan was not a seasoned founder, who Ivan would be today? Would he be selling something? Would he be doing some sort of job? What Ivan would be doing?
I don't know. I've been doing a lot of things in my life. It would probably be in between. At a point in my life, I wanted to be in finance. At a point in my life, I wanted to be an architect. If not an architect, some sort of creative. I've done a lot of creative things as a younger person. So I think that's where, Startup Founder comes, because it's the intersection of creativity, of building these products that are beautiful. But they're also, if you're going to grade them at scale, there's a lot of finance to that. And a lot of my job today is working with, how is the company doing? What are the metrics? What are the MRR? Like, what are investors thinking about? How do we, scale this long term? So it is a sort of mix between those things where I get to like work on both these sort of left and right brain type of problems every day.
Sure, sounds fair. Cool. Now that the first introduction segment, my last question. You know how to raise funds because you've done that before. You've been there, done that, and I'm sure you've done that for Daytona as well. How do you kind of think of balancing the company runway with sustainability and making sure you learn fast, making sure that you've learned from your previous startups, mistakes or learnings, whatever you want to call it? So how do you keep a balance of what to spend, when to spend in terms of financials?
That's a hard one. Again, your job as a CEO is to make sure that your company doesn't run out of money. Like, that's the number one thing. And especially if you're going to be a venture-backed company where you're going to be, raising successive rounds and going to these huge valuations and hopefully creating liquidity for the investors, the employees and the founders itself. It's a different ballgame than being sort of a bootstrap company. And I've done both in my entire life, but I'm assuming we're talking about a venture-backed venture. And so how do you do that? Like, I don't know. I only know sort of what we have done and how we look at things. And so what you're trying to achieve always with any round is at least sort of like an 18, 24 month runway that you have. And that's what you're trying to do. Obviously, there's always levers you can pull to make it, go faster and slower. You can spend more on, go to market or hires, whatever it is. You can spend less and sort of like balance this and extend those things out. I think that you should always try to raise more rounds when you can. So unless you're an AI company that's raised, $250 million on your seed, the rest of us, have to be very careful about how we raise and when we raise. So ideally, you don't want to start, and raising takes time. It's a process. So you don't want to start it when you're about to run out of money. So there's like different trains of thought, like do it like 18 months in or 6 months before you run out of money, or do a year before, like whatever. It depends on the market and how it looks. But to your question specifically, how do you think about spending, or how do we think about spending? So there are core things that we need to spend on. And so, or like to be more specific, there are timelines and milestones that we want to achieve. And these milestones will unlock something. So they will unlock a customer, a ability to go to market, whatever it is, right? And so we set a time goal to get to that. And so what do we need for that? Probably engineers, probably. And so how many engineers is needed to get that done? And note, not adding just one more engineer does not make you more productive. Like it sometimes makes you less productive. So be very, very, very wary of just adding headcount to that. And so that's one of the things of like, we have to get this metric, how many people, how many hours, how many whatever, and then you hire for that. And that's the spend. The other thing is like go to market things that we try. And so we talked about, I was in India, whatever it was, a month ago or whatever. So we run a lot of go-to-market experiments in Daytona. So we do content, we do, virtual communities, we do in-person communities, we do meetups, we do conferences, we do all these things. Or I should be more specific, we did all these things. We don't do all these things. So we try to do experiments where it's like, okay, let's try this thing, and we will try it once with this amount of budget and expect this much ROI, and whatever that ROI may be. And if it fails like miserably, like we just don't do those things anymore. Like we can try maybe once more and say maybe it was just like a one-off thing. But if it's successful, we'll say, okay, this is great. Let's do it one more time. If it works the second time, great. Then you double down, invest in that, and then you go, because the investment in that gives you some sort of, either revenue or user or whatever metric you're trying to achieve. And so we think a lot about these experiments of go-to-market, because if you look at people's, if you search, how to get customers, you'll find the same things. And if you find the same things and do the same things, you're probably not going to get the same results because everyone's doing that. So you have to figure out new ways to do that. And the only way to do that is, I think, through experiments. And so you'll burn some cash experimenting, but it's got very small amounts that you burn. And then you find out that these work really well. And one of the ones that work really well for us is supporting the Go community worldwide, because Daytona is an open source product built exclusively in Go. And so we've been holding these meetups across the world, like from the States to Europe to Africa to Asia. And they've been just great. And so after doing them for a couple times, we just doubled down on them and continue doing and supporting that community. And that community has in return supported us by contributions and helping us both in source code and in content and all these things. And it's just been great.
Super. That was, I think, super informative. I think that takes me to the main section. Ivan, why don't you talk us through what Daytona is? Why does it exist? What are the problems it is solving? And how does it fit into the overall software development or deployment lifecycle? Could you take us through that?
Sure. Daytona started as a on-prem enterprise solution. The reason that Daytona exists is that about 2 years ago, we had a bunch of inbound from everyone. So large companies, analysts, acquirers, all these things. And they were looking for something specific. They were looking for a way to automate their development environment. So they were not looking for a browser-based ID Codeanywhere thing. They were looking for, how do I get my developers to be more productive? And that was the number one thing, productive/happy. And why they asked this question is because developers spend about 56% of their productive time debugging dev environments. It's just an insane waste. If you get that productivity back, you're at Copilot AI level of productivity. You're double as productive if you get that. And so that's an a great enabler. But it's not just that. Like that's the number one reason. The other one is scalability. So the resources or the compute of your machine. A lot of people like to work on local machines. That's great. We have nothing against that. But maybe you need more resources to run this thing, this workspace, this dev environment. Or you need to spin up one or two workspaces. Like you can't do that on your machine because it just doesn't have that resource. And how do you do that? Well, right now the developer will go to, if they have it, they'll go to their DevOps team. Their DevOps teams will provision an EC2, and then they will connect the EC2, which means that now not only is their setup longer because they have to like figure out how to connect to that machine. It's up there. It's a production grade, virtual machine, not for development. So it costs way more. So you're wasting time doing that. You're wasting time pinging a DevOps team, and you're wasting the DevOps team time to do that. So there's just like a bunch of things that don't make sense to do. And when you add on top of that, the security issue, a lot of these very, very large enterprises are very, conscious about security. And then the source code is not even allowed on your local machine, but rather it has to be behind the firewall. And the only way you could do that historically is through something like terminal services, like remote desktop or Citrix. That is the worst possible experience for a developer ever. Like you have to log into like a Windows server, you see the old Windows like desktop, you have to start your IDE over there and everything's just like lagging the entire time. And I think that's just like a horrible, horrible experience. I would never like to work like that. And you have like tens of thousands of engineers worldwide working like that 8 hours a day. And so what Daytona does and what people are looking for is it creates instant repeatable dev environments that work securely where the enterprise wants to do without hindering developer experience. And so that is why Daytona exists.
Thanks for the wonderful explanation. How does it is different from conventional solutions, maybe completely different, but for the people who are new, how would you differentiate it from container services, Docker or Docker Swarm, or the worlds of when you're trying to deploy microservices into a Kubernetes cluster? Does it kind of fit in over there, or it's completely on premises, now you're going to on premises to cloud? So how do you kind of differentiate from, because when you think around isolated environment, Docker container is the first thing you kind of think around.
Sure, and it does a lot of things. We can talk about Docker, and Docker solves a lot of things, but it doesn't solve another set of things. And so let me explain what a Daytona instance looks like when it's getting set up. When you hit a button create in Daytona, you point to a GitHub Git URL, basically. So where your project is. What Daytona will do, it will essentially go and create this dev environment. So you can think of it as a Docker container, essentially. That's it. Might not be, depends on where it's deployed, but like you can think of that. So it will spin that thing up. It will then automatically check out the repository and put it inside that for you. So you don't have to do git clone. It will then read through the repository and look for a configuration file. So it will look for a dev container, a Nix, a Flux, a dev file, whatever it may be. And if it finds any of these, it will use what we call a builder and will build the entire dev environment for you automatically. Once that's done, it will open up your favorite IDE. So Cursor, VS Code, IntelliJ, whatever you want. It will connect the remote environment to that IDE. It will do all the key security exchanges for you. And it will open that up and everything will be up and running. On top of that, because Daytona runs on a centralized server, we also attach a fully qualified domain name to that. So your dev environment also becomes a preview environment if you so please. So you can also say, here's a preview of my web app, and I send it a link to you, and you get this unique link to that. So Daytona does all these things. So a Docker, container, if you so to speak, is just like one part of like all these like 7 or 8 steps that a Daytona does. So Daytona does all these things. Now, looking forward, like does Daytona support Kubernetes as dev environments? Today, no. Are we working on that? Yes. So the idea is that you can also have polyrepo or multi-repo microservice dev environments that are all automated in that same way. for the user. And all you have to do is basically hit one button. And so that's what Daytona does.
Super. I think this will be super helpful for if you have a younger audience. Most of our audience is between 20 to 26, which means either they're learning DevOps or infrastructure. So I think that will be super helpful for them as well. That how do you quickly get started? And I'm sure you're catering to a lot of these young developers to come and use Daytona, figure out how easy it is to get started from the day one. Right. Next one. Could you share some of the real world example or case study where Daytona has been significantly improved developer productivity? You don't have to name companies, but if you could just share those potential particular use cases where developers or engineering managers or SRE team are able to use Daytona and kind of did it from scratch or introduced at middle of their software development lifecycle.
Sure. Like one of the most significant ones is in a very high compliance company where they removed a virtual desktop interface for a Daytona, and they found that their developers were 71% more effective. So 71% more, PRs and commits and all these things, whatever metric they were using to measure their developers. And so that is like a very, very significant metric and a very high number, I believe, that you can get from just like swapping out a piece of software.
All right. Cool. That gets me to the next one. So let's suppose, this is a very typical use case scenario wherein we already are working on, we have set up multi microservices running on premises or Azure or typically any cloud. We are doing software development using a bunch of CI/CD tools built on top of applications are running on Java or Python. Now, in order to introduce Daytona over here, what does it take? Would we need, what sort of configuration do you want to talk about? The configs, YAML, dev containers, wherein somebody's already using or in middle of the cycle. How do you kind of introduce Daytona over there?
It's fairly easy to get it up and running. The only thing it takes is just like mindset that people want to start using this versus that. Because once you set up Daytona on your infra, this is what your DevOps team or infrastructure team will do. It takes them like a day. That's it. You as a developer, all you have to do is instead of whatever, you did open VS Code and hit on the GitHub repo, you essentially open up your terminal or go to the dashboard, whatever it may be, and type Daytona create and hit that URL. That's your entire difference. And then everything, the rest of it is seamless. You just continue working as you did. Of course, all of us generally are creatures of habit. And even the slightest habit is sort of annoying and you don't want to do it if you don't have to do it. You'd rather just do it as is. But that is the length of the difference. So versus if you were before using, just VS Code and using, whatever, the ability to check out a repo from there and working locally, like the next day you just like type in Daytona create or use the Daytona plugin, whatever it may be, and do that same thing. So when we were building out Daytona, we wanted to make it essentially zero learning curve for the developer. And we've got as close as we think we can to that for all the automation that we offer everyone.
Seems like pretty easy to get started with. I would urge everyone to get started and at least take a look at it. There's plenty of examples already available. Team Daytona engineering team has done a fabulous job when it comes to onboarding real quick. So please go ahead and watch it. Ivan, tell me one thing. It looks like it is solving a lot of infrastructure problem also, obviously. So how does it change the way an early infrastructure or mid-level infrastructure engineer would work? They would spend a lot of time setting up the dev environment and then promoting things to non-prod or higher environments. And with these developer productivity tool, I think infrastructure engineers is the one who are doing the most operation heavy job. They kind of gonna get affected. What's your take over there?
Yeah, I can tell you that the number one inbound request from customers is from platform engineering, DevOps engineering managers. Like they are the number ones because they are like bombarded with work. And so they have enough work as it is. They're not going to get more headcount, and they have to go and either, fix Docker containers on local machines or spin up EC2 instances or whatever it may be. And it's just frustrating for them. It's just manual work that it's not enjoyable. No one wants to do, and people are yelling at you anyway. So it is a terrible place to be. And so what Daytona does, like the number one thing, and that's sort of what I say in the sort of scalability part, where it automates the DevOps' work. And this is not to say that DevOps don't have work or that DevOps will, not have their job. They most certainly will. They have more than enough work to do, but they don't have to handle tedious tasks of individual developers in setting up their dev environment. So you are absolutely correct that it does relieve DevOps from a lot of this, repeated, not very intelligent work that they don't want to do anyway.
Absolutely. Okay, talking about infrastructure DevOps, how does Daytona kind of fits in into the entire cloud ecosystem as well? You've been doing a lot of release weeks as well lately. Do you want to talk about that? How Daytona integrates with public clouds and how it kind of covers those aspects as well?
Daytona runs on all public clouds like that. It runs on anything, actually. You can run it on like a box in your bedroom if you want. So that was the idea, that it can run on absolutely anything. And so the product itself, Daytona, because it's an infrastructure product, it has to integrate with everything. And I find that that's probably the most complex. I was talking to someone the other day. Is like, what's the most complex part of Daytona? It is creating a seamless experience, or streamlined experience, I should say, when integrating with all these different systems. Because one, it has to run, in Azure, Amazon, GCP, but it has to connect to GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket and Gitness and on-prem and SaaS. And they all have their own, specifics. And it has to enable multiple types of workspaces. And it has to enable all these IDEs. And it has to enable, polyrepo and multi-repo. And how do you get all these things to work together that it feels like one single experience, that you as a developer don't have to relearn for every specifics that you do? And I think that is the hardest part, or should I say that is the most significant value Daytona gives you, because all those integrations are done by Daytona in the back end, and you don't have to really care about that.
Sure, sounds fair. Cool. That takes us to the next segment. It's more around team building and a lot of grinding around. How do you figure out that when you're hiring techies or engineers, because you mentioned they're the ones who are building it, so how do you make sure that when biggies like Meta, Google, sometimes struggle to hire because there's a lot of funds available with a lot of companies, how do you make sure that you hire right set of candidates? Do you kind of prefer junior level engineer who are smart and passionate about technology, or do you have a inclination toward hiring somebody who is experienced or mid-senior level engineers who already know a lot of things?
I think it depends on where you are as a company and what you're trying to achieve. Like throughout my history, I've hired a lot of juniors because I didn't have the funds to do that beforehand. And with this company, like no one is a junior, like basically everyone is a senior at least. And so that's why we did raise funds, so we can get these people and get them onboarded. But you should also be very wary of where people come from, in the sense of like, are they and I hate using the word cultural fit, because it's like so, it's used and it's misused a lot. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe an engineer from Meta is not the engineer that you need at a 3-person startup. You probably don't need that engineer, because that engineer has a different view of life, a different view of work. Because when you're a small startup, you're just grinding. Most things don't work. There's no HR. There is no like policies around things. Like everything is like figure it out as you go. It's a very unorganized, high intensity organization. Versus, I've never worked in Meta, to be clear. I'm not picking on Meta. I'm just using that as you've said it, but as a frame of a large company. And I've worked in large companies. There is so much more order and who reports to who and who does what and who informs you to do what. And that's it's a more reactive than proactive environment. Not to saying that these people are not bad, or these people are bad or have more value or less, but in the context of what you're trying to achieve, I don't think that is the ideal thing that you want to do. And so that's why I say is like, depending on where you are, both from like a personal financial, because that's also, no one really talks about that. It's like where are you personally in your finances, you as a person, and can you afford these things? And if you can afford as a person, that's a different thing versus if you come from a place with no means and you have to be able to pay for like food every night, or you have to be able to pay food for your like child and, you know, partner and whatever, and you don't have like money. It's a very different dynamic there. So what you're trying to do. So what I'm trying to say with all these things is that I don't think like junior or senior or big company or small company is an answer that I can give. It is where is your company and what are you trying to achieve in the next 6 months to a year, and who can you bring in that will give you that. I'm not even saying that most, like, it's not even bang for buck. It is literally what can I afford, or maybe I can afford everything, and then what is a specific thing I can get to get there faster. It's like you're just trying to get to next level, and once it's very much, it is like a video game. It's like what takes you to the next level. When you get to the next level, you can change the rules and hire different people, but what gets you to the next level, right? And so that's what I think is like, if you're like a bootstrap small company, you're probably going to be able to only hire, and you have no means, you're probably going to be able to hire like interns, and that's it. And then you're going to take that because you're going to either do it all yourself or you're going to have interns help you. Versus like if you raise, you know, you're an AI company, you raise a 200 million seed, well, then you can go and steal people from Meta, probably, because you can pay for that. But if you raise like a 2 million, you probably can't hire super expensive people because you have a 2-year runway and like it burns really fast. If you hire 10, like it's all specific to the use case. So it's hard. I'm trying to answer it the most honest I can, and for specific people, I'm sure I can help. But that is the learnings that I've had, because I've also wanted to hire people from, I'll use Meta again, and they probably haven't worked out. And the reason is that we weren't at that stage that we needed people from Meta. So be very wary of those things.
No, absolutely. It's bang on to the point that it depends. If you're bootstrapping, you're going to make sure that you hire interns, make things done. But what I can perceive from here is that it is very much possible to build a company with smaller set of people, closer set of people, even if it's junior engineers, if the idea is right, if the problem you're trying to solve is right. Because it's true that you haven't raised any money, so you cannot afford people from the bigs of the world. I mean, the top Fortune 100. So absolutely makes sense. But it is fair to say that it is possible to build sizable company with interns, and when you don't have a lot of cash, make sure that you get those cash.
I mean, I can give you an example of a company that I sold my conference company. We had like 6 people. Everyone was basically new. No one was from the industry. It was like I just like the people, and they're the people I could afford and like. So it's like, do I like them and can I afford them? Like that's the intersection, right? And we made an enormous. It's like a 4,000 in-person conference that happened 3 times a year, and we sold it to another company. So like, in most cases, fairly a success with like zero knowledge from the team that's there. The company that bought us or acquired from us started and still is in a little village in Croatia, so 3,000 person village, and they hired only locally. So like they were knocking, the story is like the CEO went knocking on doors of their next door neighbor and said, hey, is your son around or daughter? Like, would they like to work for us? We're this we're this tech company. And in that village, there was no tech companies. The company now does like over 2 billion in ARR, and you know, it has like 4,000 people. So you can make a super globally successful company with these individuals, because again, even the people that are super successful and are in, I'm saying Meta again, just so I don't use another name, like they all started somewhere, right? So you can get people, if you get the right people aligned around your mission, you guys will figure it out for sure.
Absolutely. I think you can disagree with that, but I think it all depends on the founder persona. If he knows how to get things done, you just need to tap on the right set of people, and you'll just get things done because you know that how it works, even if it's events or software.
Sure, we can touch on that's founder mode, sort of tapping into the article. Yeah, but yeah, for sure, that's why the sort of buck stops, I think, with the founder. Like, you have to take ownership of that, and if someone doesn't work out, you have to like let them know, and if someone is working out, you have to double down and make sure that they stay and that they're happy to stay. So you have to figure it out. It's harder for sure, but you can do it even with just young people that really just want to work.
Absolutely. That takes us to the last segment, Ivan, which is mostly around fundraising and if you were to build Daytona today. So the first one, if you were to build Daytona today, what would you do different, taking learnings from your previous startups or mistakes or whatever you want to call it?
So when we were building Daytona, we brought in some people from our previous companies that we worked with, like people that we knew, and that was great. But for some reason, like that's a whole different conversation. But we wanted to bring in like quote unquote top talent, like people that we hadn't worked with that were really good. I think that's the wrong way to do it. And the reason I think this is that I actually really believe that in a startup, which is super high intensity, working all the time, yelling, screaming, loving, hugging, like all the emotions all together, it really helps to be high context. So it really helps when the people you're talking to know you so well that like 2 words, you get the whole context. Like I don't have to like worry that you misinterpreted what I said. Like, are there issues in communication and all these things? And so I'm actually backpedaling and hiring back people I've worked with throughout the years now, instead of going out for new people. Obviously, we add new people along the way, but if I can bring in, everyone that I liked working with in any company in my history, I should bring them all back, because it is so much more fun. It is so much easier, and it is so much better to work with people that you not only like, and I think that's really important. And you might not agree with them. Like, it's totally like we argue. It's not that we argue, but it is not that you dislike this person. And so you argue, you have different point of views, but because you know each other so well, like the arguments and the communication, it's just a breeze. And I think the biggest problem with building companies, or biggest problem in humanity in general, is communication. So if you can get to a point where when we talk and then we have a discussion and like 5 words exchange and we know what we're talking about, that is beautiful. And I think that is one of the best things. And so again, if I was rebuilding the company today, I would exclusively hire for the first like 10, 15 people, only people I've worked with. So yeah, that would be my thing I would change.
Right, so it's a lot about hiring. I think, yeah, that's true, because it's all about wavelength and being on the same page. And you need to build that wavelength with newer set of people. Maybe they're better than your previous one, but in order to build that wavelength, it takes a lot of time, because you're leaner, you're smaller, and that you've got to make sure that you both are on the same page. You're thinking it as your own baby, just like you are doing, and they would do it more often than the newer one probably. Perfect. That gets me to the final question. For the young founders, Ivan, what would be your 2 cents in terms of fundraising? How do you think around fundraising? Do you build a product first? Do you build an MVP? What are the few checklists you would like to shout out to these young fellow founders young engineers who has a great idea and they don't know how to reach out to VCs and raise money for their product or the idea which they have gotten?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of nuances to this, and I don't know how many people have talked about this. There are visible metrics or checklists that will determine the valuation, or if you'll get raised or whatever, from venture. And this is not a politically correct thing at all, but it is the way the world is. So as an example, if you are a former founder that has made investors money, you will raise again. It doesn't matter if you have a product and not product, whatever. That doesn't even matter. There's degrees to everything, right? And so I'm just giving you like very ballpark. If you are a former founder that has failed, that is also, but you took money from other investors, that is also helps you raise the next round. But you're probably going to need a bit of a story, a bit of an idea of a product. Like, you'll need these things added to that. And then we go one level underneath that, and then it's like, oh, what are your like references? What are the stamps of approval? Did you go to an Ivy League school? Did you work at an Ivy League job? So I'll make this like, were you at Harvard? Were you at Stanford? Were you ex Google? Where now it's like, are you ex DeepMind? Are you ex OpenAI? Like wherever. Do you have that sample? If you do, that is enough to get you a small single-digit million investment today without anything else. Now, if you have none of those, and then there's also like the personal stuff, which again, people don't talk about, like who is your mother? Who is your father? Who is your relative? Like there's a lot of things in the background that happen that people say, oh, I'm super successful because of whatever, but it's because like their uncle was whatever and connected them to someone else. And I think I'm a very big believer in networks. And so that network is there. And if you're born with that network, that's awesome. You can create those networks as well. And if you do, that helps you a lot. And then you're like lower tiers under that. And then you get, I'll say where I was when I started my first company, when I tried raising Codeanywhere, I did not go to an Ivy League school. I went to Croatia to school, which most people at that time didn't even know where that country existed. So like you went to a school in a country that people did not know exists, right? Like, so like not even is not Ivy League, they don't know that exists. You have no connections, you have no money, you have no previous successes, you have nothing. It is extremely hard to raise capital. You can, but then you need a great story and a working product, users there. And so when someone gives you this sort of, I'm going to say at this point, like BS, oh, all you need is this thing. Yeah, maybe, but there's so many other things that investors will look at and sort of determine, are you investable or are you not investable, right? So it is, if you have checklists as a person, that is enough. And as if they go down, the product itself has to be. And again, we're talking about the earliest stages. So we're talking about like pre-seed, seed. We're not talking about later on. Those things change. Like later on, it becomes like numbers, users, metrics, whatever, and that changes. But if you're talking at the beginning, absolutely, that is what you have to understand. So you have none of these things. You have to be further along and you'll get a lower valuation. That is 100% true. But how do you think about investors? My thought is always go for global investors, always if you can. Global usually means the US, usually. The reason is that even if you're not from there, they'll give you a discount. They will look for a discount on price, but the local investors will also look for a discount on price. That's why they're local investors. And also local investors, depending on your markets, will try to say, oh, we're better because we're local or whatever it may be. If your market is global, again, that's a caveat. So if your market, so for example, if your market is India, and you live in India, it might make sense that your investors are in. Like that might make sense. But if you're from India and you're doing like a global whatever, like I'm just gonna say Daytona, it probably is better to take a global investor. If you can get a brand name, that would be amazing. So what I want to say with that is like I would always try to go global unless there's specifics in geos that you want to do. But also do not be afraid of cold emailing. My entire career has been built on cold emailing, like the entire thing. I have emailed hundreds of thousands of people in my life personally, like not even tens, like hundreds, maybe a million, like a lot. And people will answer. A lot of people won't, but people will answer. And I think that is the most important thing. And lastly, so sort of summing up, like the first thing I want to say is like self-awareness, like figure out where you are to know what you have to have. The second thing is I'd always go for global investors. The smartest investors probably ask the smartest questions, and they are the easiest to raise money from. So I've found that more local investors sometimes are even harder to get an investment from than the global ones. So try that. Send them an email. Some say no, but some will say yes. And the last thing is when you're raising around, think about what you want to do and how you want to structure it. Especially at the smallest stages, a lot of people, and we did this as well, did like angel rounds. So you just like put together a bunch of angels and raised from them. And we raised $2 million from angels. Like there's like 60 angels that did that. And some people say like, don't do that. Do it in SPV. That's a different topic. Like there's ways to do it that make sense. But getting a bunch of these people also helps you out. And it's a lot easier to close the rounds, especially if you don't have all the checklists above. So I've spoken a lot. Don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Absolutely. I think the second point, when somebody, if you're the latter one, where you don't have great credentials, you seems to be in the latter one, and you seem to have raised funds. And then coming from somebody like you, and I think it's super inspiring, Ivan. All right, that's bring us to the end of the session. Ivan, I really thank you, and this was super refreshing for I'm sure for our viewers, but for me as well, because kind of sailing, we just started like 8 months back, and a lot of these figuring out, and then bang on with that cold reach out. So one thing as a founder, if you want to really succeed, please go ahead and learn how to do cold calls, whether it's for your investors or getting your first set of customers. I think that's super helpful. All right, and that's wraps up the session. Ivan, again, thanks a lot and good luck with building Daytona. We are all loving your product, and I'm sure our viewers, mostly DevOps engineers, would love to try out Daytona, and probably don't forget to leave a comment and how you're finding it out. Daytona's engineering team is super helpful. They've got a community in Slack. Please reach out to them if that's something needed. Yep.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Ivan. Speak later. Thank you.